Hello folks, Brandon McGee here, and I'm here with Darren Richie, the chairman and founder of Richie Litigation, as well as a new firm that's coming soon called DRE, based in Redondo Beach. Beautiful office is coming with that, by the way. We're going to do this every once in a while. We're going to call it Q&A with DRE. We got a few great topics today that Darren's going to go over, and I'm going to leave it to Darren to go over these. You're going to love what he has to speak about today.
All right, great. Well, DRE stands for Darren Richie Esquire, and I'm not that conceited that I want to have my name in everything, but you know, everyone's prideful when they get a law degree, and I think even more so when they're able to help people. You thought about it, you dreamed about it, but until you actually got to practice law, it doesn't get that rewarding.
Absolutely.
In fact, I had a really large case, and I won't get into the details, but it involved a heroin drug conspiracy, and I represented the dispatcher. And basically, it was alleged by the federal government, the DEA, and the FBI, that what would happen is they would call in for pizza deliveries. A cheese pizza was a certain amount of weight of heroin, and a pepperoni pizza was another amount of weight of heroin, and Supreme Pizza was, of course, the big daddy in terms of weight for the heroin. And it was alleged to have been a $250,000 per week operation. I'm just telling you this because it came into my mind today that I got a call yesterday from his wife, who just had a baby from him, who 1 hour after being released back into Mexico had me on his mind and told his wife to call me to tell me that he got released. He was facing life in prison. He ended up getting out in 21 months. Wow. And of course, he wasn't guilty of the crimes that were alleged. And we proved that by all of the laws that they charged him with. And we were able to get him really a deal that took into consideration the levity of the charges, the seriousness of the charges, combined those and got him a situation where he could have his life back and guaranteed.
That's awesome.
What was touching for me is that within 1 hour of being released, I was on his mind and he wanted his wife to contact me. So just to tell you again how it is to impact people,
Absolutely.
It's something that gets me up every single day. And it has nothing to do with money.
Right.
It has everything to do with humanity.
And that's where the success comes from, you know, that it's not about the
That's
money.
right. So today we're going to be talking about 3 topics. I'll be quick and easy because they're very simple, and I want people like your audience to understand this. The first is whether or not you should talk to police when questioned.
I would like to know that, that's for sure.
There's a pot attorney in a firm on Instagram that's quite popular, and I won't name them by name, and they gave the answer to that, and essentially it was fuck no.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit more of a gentleman, so I'm just going to tell you it's never a good idea to talk to the police without an attorney.
Okay.
And here's a reason. I'm going to kind of focus on a very acute issue that no one thinks about. So you might understand that talking to a police officer requires you to waive your Miranda rights. Miranda refers to a seminal case that the United States Supreme Court decided many years ago that says, hey, look, you have the right to remain silent, and that anything that you say can and will be used against you.
Yep.
And if you don't have a lawyer present because you have a right to it, one will be provided for you. It's something that an officer says every single day, all the time when they try to talk to people. Does it sound familiar to you?
It sounds very familiar to me.
Well, when they say can and will be used against you, let me tell you, that's not a warning. It's a promise. No matter what you say, they'll twist it and they'll use it against you.
Of course.
And the law has been litigated for, many, many years, decades upon decades now. And what it comes down to is whether or not that waiver of those rights was knowing, voluntary, and intelligent. And each one of those words has its own meaning. Mm-hmm. And they're very unique, very descriptive, and very important. They're mutually exclusive also.
Okay.
So you could have a knowing waiver, but it's not voluntary and intelligent. You could have a voluntary waiver, but it's not knowing and intelligent. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
Okay, so it's extremely important. So people think, wow, I'm going to get my interview with the police suppressed because I made a mistake, I talked to the police, but I hired a great lawyer. So they're going to bring a motion to suppress, and they're going to say it either wasn't knowing, or it wasn't voluntary, or it wasn't intelligent, or all of the above, and it's gone.
Right.
I have a case like that right now on an attempted murder case.
Okay.
I've got the statement suppressed. In this statement, this defendant admitted pretty much everything. You think, wow, we got a real advantage here because they're not going to be able to use that statement. By the way, he was under duress. It was 4 in the morning. He hadn't slept for 2 days. He was on alcohol, Xanax, and marijuana, so couldn't be knowing, voluntary, and intelligent, right?
Right.
He also asserted his right to remain silent almost imperfectly by saying, I want to plead the fifth, rather than saying, I wish to see my attorney or I want to remain silent. But we got it suppressed.
Okay.
Guess what, though?
What?
If you bring that defendant on the stand at trial, anything that he says can be challenged in terms of credibility by what was said in the statement. Okay. So they won't use the statement, and they cannot use the statement to bring any substantive argument into trial. The prosecution can never use the statement because it's suppressed.
Right.
But in terms of impeachment, they can use it. So you might think, I hired a great lawyer and he proved that it wasn't knowing, voluntary, and intelligent, and it's suppressed. They'll never be able to use it. Wrong. They can actually use it to impeach you. So if you're on the stand and you say you were at the mall at 4 o'clock, but in your statement you said you were at your girlfriend's house where the shooting occurred at 2 o'clock, they can bring that out, even if it's been suppressed for constitutional reasons. So what does it mean? It means that the pot lawyers were correct. Never talk to the police without an attorney.
Gotcha. It's good to know. Please take that advice.
One comment I always like to say about that is a lot of people say, well, I can't afford to. I'll say you can't afford not to.
Okay, that's good. That's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. A friend recently asked me also, like, can you record police? Because there's been a lot of claims about excessive force and police officers using restraints and constraint against the public that are, not constitutional and could cause injury. And through all the protests that we've seen recently, you've seen a lot of people trying to take videotape.
Everybody, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of people are unsure, can you video the police? And oftentimes the police will tell you something like, put that phone away. Stop filming me. Stop recording.
I've seen that, yeah.
They can't do that.
Okay.
There is a penal code called Penal Code California Section 647, which is if you try to conceal your recording of a police officer, then you might be subject to a misdemeanor, which would be a $1,000 fine or a year in jail. But if you out in the open take a video or audio recording of a police officer performing his lawful duties or unlawful duties while on duty, you are well within your right to do that, and they cannot tell you to stop.
Okay, that's really, really good to know.
And last topic that we're going to discuss today is something that's also in the news a lot. We've been talking about this movement requiring the defunding of the police department. Have you heard about that?
I have.
Do you even know what that might mean?
I have no idea what that means.
It seems odd, right? Because no matter what side of the debate you're on, you're thinking, well, how are we going to exist without a police department?
I mean, if they don't have the funding, you would think that it'd go away. That's kind of the first thing that comes to mind.
And here in Los Angeles, the city council approved a $150 million reduction of the Los Angeles Police Department budget just last week. The budget totally is $1.5 billion. So this is 10% of the budget, right?
Okay, yeah.
It's significant. It's substantial, and it means a lot less officers, probably less than 9,000 officers to cover Los Angeles.
Wow.
Less training, less motivation, less overtime, less officers that are walking the beat, less horseback, less bicycle cops, all of it.
Right.
But you know what? There are some good arguments out there. There might be some more social justice plans that could work more effectively.
Right.
And a couple of those that have been mentioned was one with regard to traffic tickets, that somebody would pull you over that would be employed by the city, but they would not be armed, and they would not have arresting authority, and they would not be police officers or law enforcement. But they would simply knock on your window, pull you over, make you roll your window down and say, hey, look, let me remind you why speeding is dangerous. Show you a few pictures of accidents that have happened and people that have gotten injured.
Okay.
And then you're thinking, well, what if you got a crazed guy that's drunk or on drugs and subjecting the public to serious danger? You and your family are driving next to him. What do we do? You know, the city manager is just going to knock on his window and say, please don't do this.
Right.
In that scenario, they're talking about knocking on the window, pulling you over, rolling your window down, and you would have a card that's required that tells you who your best friends and family are. And the person would call that number that's on the card and have them come and pick you up. And also remind you at the same time why it's dangerous to be driving under the influence or while intoxicated, and show you pictures maybe of maimed folks that have fallen out of the car through a DUI accident or through the front windshield and have their heads cut off. It's very common. And that's a social justice program. But the one I want to talk to you today about is domestic violence. And the reason why the traffic tickets and domestic violence are the two most talked about topics are because those are the two types of crimes and calls that police officers get that typically rise to issues with law enforcement. So 50% of all traffic citations are the source of confrontations with law enforcement. Accidental shootings, purposeful shootings, arguments with police officers, deployment of tasers, and obviously officer-involved shootings. Domestic violence, it occurs as well because the officers show up at the house and there's probably, you know, generally speaking, somebody that's intoxicated and in a altercation that might be physical with their spouse. There might be other drugs in the house. There might be weapons in the house, and things tend to escalate. So along the lines of what we discussed on the traffic issues, they're talking about a social justice program where social workers will arrive instead of police officers, and they'll say, who are your top 5 neighbors that we're supposed to call in this type of situation? Have them come over and calm the situation down. Well, this is important because in domestic violence cases, they typically charge something called false imprisonment. And in cases involving false imprisonment, they have to prove certain elements. And that would be a situation where you get in an argument with your spouse and you either constrain or restrain them for a period of time, no matter how short in duration, where you don't let them leave. And it's almost akin to a kidnapping type of a charge. That's what it sounds like to the public. And why does that happen? Because they get into a physical altercation. It's not just a straight beat down necessarily, but it's also a major restraint where the person can't leave. Well, what I wanted to discuss is the elements to that charge. And those are really easy to beat if you have the facts on your side. And we just did one this morning where a case was dismissed in Lancaster for these very reasons. Extremely important situation because domestic violence charges can be elevated and enhanced with the false imprisonment charge. So you must have an intentional confinement, you must have it to be without consent, you must have no reasonable means of escape, and there must be harm or injury. All of those 4 must be met. So what does a criminal defense attorney do? Well, intentional confinement may not be the situation if you were trying to save that person from themselves, for example, or if you're trying to save yourself from that person. So say that they were on drugs and you got into an argument with them and you didn't want them to run out the front door and go commit suicide by cop or run in front of a street with cars on the road or jump into the middle of the freeway. You're constraining them, but it's not intentional necessarily because you have other reasons that may defend it, like self-defense. Or let's say, for example, you just hold them back to make sure that they don't hit you, but you didn't really mean to restrain them. It was just a result of self-defense. With or without consent, maybe if somebody was forced to stay in a kitchen during the argument, but they willingly stayed in there to talk to you about it, well then they've consented to staying in the kitchen. No reasonable means of escape means that the door was open. So even though you might be a bigger guy and you're stronger and you're a male and the other person is a female, if the door is open and they're free to leave, there's an argument that there was a reasonable means of escape. And in the end, if there was no harm or injury, if you were just like, hey, let's say we were in a relationship and I say, hey, Brandon, don't leave right now. I want to talk to you about this because depending on how we end this argument, our relationship may not exist. Well, if I didn't physically harm you and you have no injury, there may not be any false imprisonment.
That makes sense.
So we literally prescribe the law. We make the prosecution beyond a reasonable doubt prove every letter of every word of every sentence of every statute that the California legislature put out.
Gotcha. Okay. That's great information. And, you know, I think the viewers are going to find it very helpful. I know I did.
Good.
Thank you so much for your time.
Don't get into any arguments with your spouse because you're armed with all this great information.
I will not. I will not. I'm going to stay single, actually. But yeah, thank you so much, Darren. We appreciate it. If you have any questions for the next episode here, please leave a comment, like the page, subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to be doing this as often as possible. And just pick Darren's brain because there's a lot of good information in there. Thank you.
Stay safe.